Those few very successful introverts I'm talking about, I want to start with this one, Rosa Parks. So I think if you've not heard of her, she was the basically the face of the fight for equality in the US with racial boundaries and a version of apartheid, I guess, that was happening in the US back in the 1950s. And she was a woman who refused to sit at the back of the bus where apparently the coloured people had to sit. She refused to do that. She sat at the front of the bus, caused a major drama, but that actually spiraled then into an equal rights movement that culminated in far more than just equal rights. It involved Martin Luther King Jr. and many other people, and it led to laws being changed in order to help people to be far more seen as as equal to others in the US as well. But she was described as being overall a very timid and very shy person, not someone who wanted to speak out. She was just that and I've seen a movie about this and read some interviews about her, that the reason why she wasn't to stand up and be some hero for a movement. She did it because she was tired, she was sore, she'd had enough, she was in a bad mood that day, and she just wasn't going to let anybody be telling her what to do. It wasn't about her being courageous or brave. It's just that she was tired of just doing what she was expected to do. And I think that makes her a hero just as much as anyone else. Bill Gates, referred to as a quietly spoken person, prefers solitude, doesn't really like to be in many large environments with big crowds. He certainly doesn't want to be much of a public figure, but together with his ex-wife Melinda, the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation has gone and helped almost eradicate malaria around the world, and has been working on immunizations and vaccinations for various other diseases that have come up, including some contributions to COVID-19 research as well. But he's one of the founders of Microsoft and a global philanthropist. But yet this person who has done so much, and he's done some pretty bad things as well. He wasn't always the best person apparently to work for. He has gone on to do fantastic things. So he's not just someone who, was quiet and shy. Meryl Streep, you would never expect this. Avoids crowds, avoids noisy environments, goes to award shows that only she has to go to. She doesn't like going to lots of them. An Academy Award winner and an absolute international megastar. She is someone who has just done phenomenal work, and I'll always remember her role in Kramer versus Kramer, which is a very old movie. I suggest you go and see it. Fantastic story about divorce. And of course, more recently in The Devil Wears Prada. Dr. Seuss was scared of meeting children in case they were disappointed by how quiet and how uninteresting he is. Yet he created these worlds that were absolutely amazing. Certainly part of my childhood. A prolific author was perhaps part of your childhood as well. I think there's something to be said for the creativity of people who aren't concerned necessarily with pleasing the crowd. Emma Watson from the Harry Potter movies and the Beauty and the Beast only attends the events she absolutely has to. She is not a fan of getting out in public and having to dress up, and she prefers to be in her pajamas and her Ugg boots, sitting around cooking. In fact, she says that she'd rather be cooking than going out to an awards event anytime. Another one you might recognize, Elton John, quiet and avoidant at parties and events, doesn't really like talking to people that much, prefers to keep a very intimate group of friends around him that he knows, that he trusts, that he feels comfortable with, rather than being this highly extravagant, entertaining performer in his private life. He's actually completely not highly extravagant and highly entertaining in his private life, and be quite a narky old man when he really wants to be, when he doesn't get the space that he thinks he needs at any one time. Excuse me. Now, a few misconceptions are going around about being introverted, and those of you who can probably start to, excuse me again, starting to relate to some of those people we've just mentioned. You might be that person. I have my moments where I'm a narky old man too. So I understand how sometimes you just want to get away from things, but that may not seem like it's really much fun for being online and being the life of the party in digital channels. But introverts are not antisocial. We're not in any way antisocial. We actually are very good friends. We've got very good, strong networks, but they may not be highly massive networks. They might not be huge networks. They might be networks of hundreds or thousands of people. They tend to be more likely to be networks of people in just maybe a dozen people. We don't tend to have huge networks around us. Doesn't make us antisocial. It does make us quite selectively social though. Introverts certainly don't make bad leaders. Obama was Barack Obama was is a very renowned introvert. He would often, like, he used to say that one of the reasons why he found it hard to give up smoking when he became the president of the US was because his smoking time was his alone time, when everybody would leave him alone and he'd just go out there and have 5 minutes to himself. And that was part of his ritual. And he had to find a way of carrying that ritual across without smoking, which is a much harder thing as a ex-smoker from, like, I quit back in 2010. So it's been what, 23 years, nearly 23. Nearly 13 years since I last had a cigarette. So those things, I remember that feeling as well, that out of all the phone calls and all the people talking and everyone looking for attention and time from me, that my cigarette break was that ultimate moment where I just got to be myself and I could just shut the world out. Doesn't make us bad leaders, though, because there's plenty of us who are leaders. Introverts are not bad at social media. In fact, I teach people social media. I am regarded as one of the authorities in Australia on social media, simply because I'm actually paid by Facebook to promote their products and to teach people how to use their products. So being an introvert doesn't make you necessarily bad at social media. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. When you are more introverted, you tend to be someone who tends to think through what you're putting onto social media a little bit more thoroughly than those who just sort of like think it and then blurt it out. So in fact, we might be said to be actually a little bit better at social media because we think about it that little bit more. The idea that introverts are unreliable comes from the idea that we do like to not necessarily go to parties all the time and to be going to events. And if there's a night out with friends, which we know is going to be at a very noisy restaurant, we tend to find an excuse to not go. That doesn't make us unreliable, though. In fact, what it does make us is that when we choose to work with someone, when we choose to be in someone's presence, we very much want to be there. It's just we tend to not want to go to the things where we really don't feel like we're going to be comfortable, and they're not important things. Again, it's that selective social thing and a selective work thing and a selective conversations that we tend to have. The idea that introverts make terrible public speakers is absolutely incorrect. I know that a guy called Yasir Khan, who is one of my favorite public speaking coaches in Canada, is highly introverted and really doesn't see any point in being a superstar, but has learned to get through that in order to become a very, very effective, very good public speaker who's featured on TED Talks. So he's definitely someone who is an introvert, calls himself an introvert, but has learned how to be a much better public speaker despite that introversion that he feels. The idea that introverts are not very good at promoting themselves online is also rubbish. Honestly, Yassi is brilliant at it. I do a lot of it. I've seen example after example after example. Ellie Middleton, who I'm going to show a little bit of a slice of her life a little bit later on, is also a very, very effective social media and online and promotional juggernaut who happens to be quite introverted. And on top of that, is recently diagnosed in the last year as having autism. So all these reasons why we give ourselves for being a little bit less willing than to be in the center of attention all the time. There's very good ways of us to be able to understand that that is actually an advantage to us, not necessarily a disadvantage, and something that's going to drive us into some sort of, career slide, for instance. Now, I did say before that planning is far more important than courage. I'm going to change that word from courage to charisma here. The reason why is that we often feel like people who are influential, people who are very good at what they do, people who are excellent public speakers have this magical charisma. But really what they've had is just a lot of planning. It's not like they just magically or necessarily know how to do things well. I think you remember being at school when you had to wing it for a book report or something, unless you'd planned out what you're going to do, the chances are that book report was just going to be a complete made up nonsense and you get called out on it. But if you plan ahead, even if you're not very particularly charismatic, you've got the structure, you know how you're going to say what you're going to say and how it's going to play out, then you become far more effective at doing that. Coming into the future again, into the present, not in our school days, it's probably a trip through trauma for some of us. A quote here from a guy called Abraham Lincoln. Now, it's attributed to him, but it's actually not necessarily proven that he said this. But it says, "Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe." Preparation and planning are far more effective when it comes to the act of chopping down the tree, public speaking, getting your social media ducks in a row, writing for your social media, writing for your website, than just simply doing those things on their own. The planning and preparation takes time. And in my case, I spent one day during the holiday period. It was New Year's Day, actually. No, it wasn't. It was New Year's Eve. I spent the day working on one thing, which is writing all of my social media posts for 2023 for one of my businesses. I want to write every single day of 2023 a social media post. Now, I used various tools to help me along with that, to make them so they worked, they were going to work correctly, they were going to happen properly, but they were always going to be something that was going to be like a little bit, it's going to be hard to do it, put it that way. A year's worth, 365 posts for social media in one day, could not have done it without the prior day on the 30th, having spent the time working out what I was going to write. So I spent the day before planning for what I was going to write, and then the day after that, actually doing the writing. So it wasn't like it was some hero that pulled off a superhuman feat of being able to pull off this massive amount of writing all at once. It wasn't like that at all. In fact, it was the complete opposite of that. I planned it all the day before, then did it the next day. In fact, the planning I did was all to cover 3 businesses and my personal accounts, to plan out what everything is that I'm going to write about for the rest of this year on every piece of my social media. Now I've got that big list on a spreadsheet. I don't actually have to then worry now about going into that week and going, oh, what am I going to write about? And then, oh, what am I going to write? Oh, I'm now going to do the graphics as well. I've taken the biggest step out of the way, which is what am I going to write about? And now when I get to that week, I'll have that already in place. I go, that's what I'm writing about. Great, write it. And it's done. That's sharpening the axe, essentially, and getting yourself ready to do the big amount of work. Now, it's a lot more important to have the planning, the charisma, because, well, we're trying to be more confident online, right? And to do that, you'd think involves a fair bit of charisma. But issue number one with us introverts is that we tend to avoid going places and doing things that are not familiar to us. So that might actually kind of cause us some problems when it comes to doing things like social media, like building a website or using a new system. We're not generally the people who want to sit down and learn that sort of stuff. In fact, we prefer to just use the things we've always used and using the routines we've always built ourselves into. But you can educate yourself as part of that preparation for getting really good at what you're doing. Now, some of that can be just being on webinars like this. Some of these lessons can be fantastic ways for you to learn new skills and make yourself able to do things you didn't think you could. You could use things like Google's Digital Garage, which has got like about 300 different lessons to teach you all about things to use with Google Ads, SEO, building websites, a little bit about social media in there as well. There's all sorts of things. Just had a bell ring. I don't know what that was, but it rang. So that was also got the Meta Blueprint, which is a way for you to use the Meta tools, so Facebook and Instagram, WhatsApp and Messenger, that will teach you how to do all that. You got Twitter Flight School, which is the same for Twitter. Essentially, all these things are for those different things. If you want to get into TikTok this year, well, then you can use something like TikTok Academy, which is a step-by-step way of teaching you how to use TikTok as a business and as a creator that doesn't require you having to listen to the 30,000 different videos that are currently on YouTube on how to be a TikTok superstar. You want to learn WordPress? Go to WP Beginner. That's a place to start with if you want to build your website on WordPress. For Google Sites, if you want to do it, where you kind of have to just jump in and do it. It's a self-paced way of doing these things. So to get yourself ready for being more effective online and be a bit more present online, you can do more than just simply go in and become someone who is, I suppose, unable to do anything because they don't like to learn new things. You become someone who becomes more effective and more outgoing and confident because you've done some new things, but you haven't just jumped in and done it, because that's not necessarily your style of learning. Your style of learning might be, let me research it before, let me do some learning before, then I'll head out and do it. So you can become more confident simply by educating yourself, just by getting more information about this before you get confronted with a new system that you're expected to learn in 1 minute. Issue number 2, we introverts, we prefer doing things that have a plan to follow and having no surprise. This is a big one for me. I used to be like chaos when I was young. I think a lot of us tend to be when young, quite chaotic. In my case, I was chaotic. I preferred doing things like very, very spontaneously. As I've gotten older, I prefer to have things following along a plan that I can follow clearly and easily. And some of that would be, so I have no surprises coming up. I don't like surprises. So with the no surprises, I'm looking at forming a content plan. So I was telling you about how I was forming all my plan for my whole year of social media posts. Well, that's where this comes in. So as part of that content plan, you might just go, well, to become more confident online, I want to be able to be a bit better planned, because if I'm a bit better planned, I'll feel a little bit more bold, and I'll feel a little bit more like I'm able to, yes, I'll be bold and spontaneous, but in my own timeline, in my own ability to time this out. So you might look at who is your audience? What do they like? What will they post? Know those things before you go in. When will you post it? So if, for instance, you might want to schedule things ahead rather than getting to the day, because so many things can go so horribly wrong during the day. You may think, well, actually, I would prefer that I didn't have it like this. I prefer that I actually know what's happening ahead of time. And also spread your content load, so you don't have to do everything in that one day. Like I was explaining before, what the horror for me was getting myself into a position where it's Monday. I have to get a post out at about 10:30 a.m., no later than that. I haven't even thought about what it is, what I'm going to post. I'm flustered. My emails are coming in. I'm getting phone calls coming out of every direction. I've got a blocked time coming up. I'm thinking, how in the heck am I going to be able to do this? That to me was not acceptable. I needed to spread that content load out. So whilst I still may have to write a post on a Monday morning for Monday, at least now I know what I'm writing about. I also know exactly what the mood is, what my values are that will be expressed in it. I'm not rushing to do everything all at once. It's just that one thing that I need to do at that one time. Issue number 3 for we introverts: we generally shy away from public judgment and criticism for strangers. So that could be pretty much anybody could do that. I don't think any of us are necessarily fully comfortable with that. But introverts particularly, don't just fear it, we completely and utterly avoid it, and avoid getting into situations at all which may see us get a little bit judged or a little bit criticized, particularly if it's public. So one way I've worked around this is to try your content out on people you know and trust first. I wrote a report that went live yesterday for one of Australia's biggest influencers. So her name is known to a lot of people. And I posted that on LinkedIn, and I didn't feel too bad about that because I don't know this person. I'm just reviewing their social media and personal brand strategy they appear to be using. But the following week's one for next week is for someone I actually do know. So I found that it was easier to go to her and say, here's a report I wrote about you. It's all positive. It's all wonderful. It's actually highlighting some amazing things that I think you do that other people should be aware of. Can you have a read through to make sure it's okay? Now, knowing her and feeling comfortable to speak to her, I wouldn't have discovered there was all these spelling errors and typos all over the place that she spotted out for me in a very, very, very compassionate way, in a way that wasn't looking to me and go, you're an idiot, man. How did you spell that wrong? It wasn't anything like that. It was actually very easy to get that feedback from her because she's someone who I know and trust. Putting that out to the public, then having some narky spelling grammar Nazi coming in and being all smarmy about it on LinkedIn would just be something which makes me feel terrible. So I'm so glad that I put it out there to my friend who I wrote about, rather than letting the public criticize me for having terrible grammar. And sometimes, because my mind goes way ahead of what my typing speed can be, I skip words. Sometimes I skip entire sentences, and it's just, sometimes that stuff just doesn't make sense. So asking your friends and family, trusted colleagues, mentors, if you've got one, your networks, like your smaller networks of people who know how to pick up on those things that you sometimes don't know how to pick up on. I think that's where you can get some real help in being able to get more prepared. So you can become more confident because you've checked everything. So you feel a little bit safer putting that stuff out there. So what we're not trying to do is trying to magically make you confident or magically make you an extrovert. What we want to do is take those things that introverts are good at, which is being more cautious, more careful, and more measured in our considerations, and using that as an advantage to make sure we get the right thing out. Because as you know, the more you get those right things out, the more confident you'll become as a person as well. Issue number 4. Introverts generally don't like making mistakes, and especially don't like making them publicly. And this is pretty much the same sort of thing. So if you're not comfortable with mistakes, do a little bit of research first. Don't just jump in there and try and wing it, because we don't tend to wing it well. look at what others do that work. So for instance, when I'm trying to prepare my personal brand, I went and compared myself to 15 other people who do amazing work in my similar area and thought, well, how can I take pieces of what they do, mix that with who I really am and the authenticity that I have in myself, and do this in a more organized way than simply just jumping in the pool and hoping that I can swim. What do others do that works? Look for their patterns. I used a tool called Phantom Buster. Now, Phantom Buster allows you to log into LinkedIn and pull out basically someone's last 400 posts. So what I did with a couple of the people that I was looking to see what their patterns were, so I could sort of reverse engineer what they'd done to get really popular and really have some great engagement with their followers and their fans, is that I reverse engineered what they did by looking at their patterns. And I noticed something that just about all of them tend to repeat their best posts multiple times during the year, sometimes as much as every month. They'll repeat the content of that post, but rewrite it in a slightly different way. So I thought, well, that's a way that I could probably do a bit the same. So I can then pull out all my posts, put them in a spreadsheet and do much the same thing and say, okay, there's my best posts, bring that back again so that it's got plenty of ability to reach people who weren't reached the first time that post was. Because as you know, in business on social media, just because someone read you once doesn't mean they're going to read every single post you've ever written before the end of time. It's not kind of like that. Another way to get more confident with these is to use spell checking. Use things like Grammarly or Hemingway, which are writing apps. They're free to plug into your Chrome browser, and they'll help you as you're writing to correct things, to write in a more clear way. You'll have the free version of Grammarly, which I actually use the paid version because for me it's such an important tool that I'll pay the $100 or so a year that it takes to do that, simply because it is an amazing tool. Hemingway is one that a couple of copywriters I know, they absolutely swear by. It's very good at its spelling. It's very good at very much the same sort of stuff as Grammarly. For me too, it also, Grammarly has, and I'm pretty sure Hemingway does too, has a plagiarism checker. So the plagiarism checker will then go through and ensure that what you've written isn't just plagiarized from someone else, that you've actually come up with something original. And then we'll give you some opportunities to go, okay, here's the areas that look like they're plagiarized. You may want to change them. Believe me, with billions and billions upon billions of articles on the internet, it's going to happen that sometime you're going to write something you think is brilliant and someone else has come up with it. So if you can cite that, or otherwise write something that's slightly different, which isn't quite so matching, then you might be able to work your way around it. So we kind of got the idea now of the little things, the little tasks we can do that help us to become a little bit more confident about what we're doing online. A lot of it's to do with planning and preparation. And it's just making sure you've got the tools ready to go. You've got people ready to go to be able to check things for you, that you have the time, that you've planned things out. You're not putting yourself in a rush or anything like that. So now we look at using what's different about you. And there might be something that's particularly different. It could be you have pink hair and you love your pink hair, or it could be that you are part of a minority group of people that's not often given a lot of representation, and that might be really good for you as well. It could be anything you like that's quite different about you. And as boring as you may think you are at any one time, I can tell you now that you are absolutely fascinating to a whole lot of people. I didn't realize that. I thought I was quite dull and boring and quite emotionally cold. And then I found out that's not the way I come across at all. I come across as warm, approachable, knowledgeable, with interesting anecdotes and stories and an interesting life story. And I was like, oh, really? And they say, yeah, you've got great stories to tell. I didn't know that was the case. So using the things that are different about me now to help me become more confident. And the more that, and I've always found that the more you can talk about the things that are not so great in your life, the more you're absolutely able to be in a position where people will want to hear more from you, because your story is more than just facts and figures and how to learn things. Half of learning is the way it's presented. The other half is how it's received. So if you can present things in such a way that people can receive them, and storytelling is a great way to do that, then you're a lot closer on the route of becoming a far better educator than someone who just reads facts and figures off a screen. So here's Ellie Middleton. I was talking about her just briefly before. A late diagnosed neurodivergent person, so autistic person. She writes about almost nothing else but her journey as a late diagnosed neurodivergent person, as someone who has autism. So she does a lot of advocacy for this. She's become increasingly hugely followed personality on LinkedIn. It's crazy how many people follow her. For someone who is both introverted, who says she's also autistic and a little bit of ADHD as well, that she's then in these areas where she's no longer ashamed of those things about herself. In fact, they've become the basis of her very personality online. People come to her to learn about how to work with neurodivergent people. People come to her to break down what their expectations are of what neurodivergent people are. And it's not always just people who sit rocking in a chair, unable to communicate, whilst that is still part of neurodivergence. There's a lot of people who are not like that as well. Ellie's one of those. She's a very effective public speaker, a leader in her space. She's an educator. She's a creator. She's founded a community of people who have all been late diagnosed autistic, and they're now finding strength in that diagnosis and realizing their autism isn't a failure or something to be ashamed of. It's actually one of their superpowers. ADHD, I know one of our advisors on Business Station, Bob Jones, is self-describes himself as having ADHD. And he's certainly in that same position where he goes, I've got this inability to be able to talk about ADHD, and now I can talk about it and talk about it as my superpower. And that's what he describes it as his superpower. So Ellie's an example of someone who has taken a part of her life, which she used to be very, very ashamed about, has now made it very much the subject of what she does online. Same goes for this guy, Luke Manton. Luke is adorable. He is such a smart, intelligent guy, full of life and full of personality and charisma. He also has Tourette's syndrome. So in this particular post, he was talking about Tourette's on a flight. It was very much as bad as you can imagine. So in the UK, they've got a Tourette's card, which basically is an ID that's telling the people, look, this is telling you that I'm officially going to say things that are going to be weird and wacky and horrible. Things like, he was saying things at the time on the plane, which he jokes about in this post, saying, I've got a bomb in my bag. Things like, oh yeah, he's hot, the flight attendant, and all these things just come out and you cannot stop them. There's no way of stopping it. It's a neurological disorder, which they're things that like you don't even think about. They just pop out of your head. And it's like, where did that come from? I don't even believe that. So of course, he could see as he was walking on the flight that there was a lot of people like, oh my God, I hope I don't have to sit next to that guy with Tourette's. So I really don't want to walk across, because they could hear him with his tics playing up as he got nervous getting on the flight. His tics would flare up even more. But instead of taking this as some sort of shame, what he's tried to do is turn this into his strength. So he likes to call it big tic energy, because he's got a lot of tics, physical tics and verbal tics as well. He is a speaker, a public speaker with Tourette's. You can imagine how that goes sometimes, but he's decided that he's going to be able to do that. He is also a professional virtual personal assistant. So he's able to do things from remotely because he doesn't fit that well into a lot of workplaces that don't cope too well with his Tourette's. So I've worked very closely with someone who who has Tourette's, a client of mine. And the same thing, he's been in a position where all his life, people have excluded him, kept him away. He's not got jobs because of it, not got high up on the ladder because of it. And so has always sort of had to do his own thing and form his own business, so which he's been very, very successful at doing. So that's what you might consider a definite disadvantage to your career. This is something that someone like Luke's been able to use to his advantage. This is Ash Rathod. Ash, his skin suddenly started changing several years ago, and he started vitiligo, which is where what a lot of people say Michael Jackson had on his hand, which is why he wore the gloves and covered up his skin a lot. Ash is the same thing. It started happening around his face. So it's not something he could ever hide. It's something which became part of him. It's something which, it's right there in your face, literally. He could not hide that. And so for a lot of time that he had like a makeup regime that he was taught on how to cover it up. And then his wife just said, but Ash, that's not your face. I love your face, and that's not your face. And that's what sort of turned him into going, why am I ashamed of this? Why is this something I have no control over? Is something I've got a shameful thing of? So he figured a lot of things out, as he says in a lot of his posts, and he actually talked about how he came out as having vitiligo, and now he proudly shows his face. He'll proudly have photographs of himself, a lot of photographs of himself, not only to show that many people that vitiligo happens, and that it's actually part of natural living and life, and it happens across many different animals in the animal kingdom, not just humans, and that he is effective as someone who is amazingly good at writing. He's a brilliant personal brand analyst as well. I'd certainly take a lot of inspiration from him, but it goes to show again, there's someone who has something which they would think is not to be shown to the public, that people would laugh and point their fingers. In fact, he's got a huge following on LinkedIn and had a post go viral, millions of times read and viewed, that he brings back every 3 months in a different format to tell his story again to those people who are new at following him. He's a very humble, very beautiful human being, gentle, got a very gentle spirit about him, but at the same time is just such a beautiful writer, has a fantastic way of using the English language. Another one here is Chantel Thompson, an Indigenous Australian woman who has gone and done her jiu-jitsu black belt. So she's got a podcast. She's got 2 podcasts now. She's got about the Bakinji warrior, and she's sharing stories and insights and learnings and wisdom about leadership, about persistence, about hard work, about being an Indigenous woman as well. And she's very big in storytelling, and she's an Indigenous entrepreneur as well. So she's been able to do so many different things that take a part of her life and go, I'm going to be able to show this as a core part of who I am, not just because I'm hopping on some sort of Indigenous bandwagon, because she certainly is not. She's very much a proud member of her Indigenous community and an advocate for it. But what she's done is taken that piece of herself and gone, I'm going to push this forward, and I'm going to gain my confidence, not just, and this is a message for all the people we've just highlighted here, not pushing themselves forward because of those things, but allowing those things to step before them. So it gives them cause to step in those things, the things that are so obvious with them. Ash with his skin changing. Chantel with the fact that she is an Indigenous woman and that can't be hidden, and she doesn't want to hide that. Ellie, because she is a little bit kooky and weird, and she's the first person to tell us how kooky and weird she is. And Luke with his Tourette's. These are things that go before them everywhere they go. So the idea now will be to continue have those things going forward with them, but as part of them stepping forward. So they just have to step on and go, oh, I'm stepping forward as me, and I feel embarrassed, and I feel like I have shame, and I feel like I have no courage. They're letting their things that make them different step before them. Hopefully that makes sense. So for me, I've had to step forward in many different ways in my lives as a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, as an overweight man, as a guy who went bald, as all these different things that I've stepped forward as someone who was introverted. Those things have all stepped before me, and I found great confidence in that, because I didn't have to step forward as me with all my darkness and all my insecurities. I stepped forward as someone who would highlight certain things that were a little bit different about myself, and those little things that are different are thoroughly fascinating to someone. You'll have something about you or something that you do that can step before you. So you don't necessarily have to step forward in all of your ugly warts and all. You can just step forward and say, hey, this is something that I didn't do so well recently. I want to put that out there. And as you find that people react really well to that, your confidence will come up. Now, will you be judged? Will someone say something nasty? Yeah, of course they will. I had someone, back in November, have a crack at me because he was basically humbugging me to hire him as a personal trainer for months. And one stage he called me during a holiday, and I was like, mate, would you just stop calling me? I'm on holidays. I don't have time for this, and I'm not interested. And now he decided to have a go at me. 3 years later, on a LinkedIn post, when I was talking about people communicating and talking, he said, I once tried to talk to you and you shut me down because you're on holidays, and I had no idea. And like, I could enter into a conversation about this, but I've got to look at that and go, you know what? Sometimes you just got to block people. You just got to block them out and don't have anything to do with them. So that's what I did with that particular guy, because I'm not putting myself out there to be criticized, but criticism will happen. but I don't necessarily need to have the fight right there online. I don't need to be a knight in shining armor coming to my own defense and my own honor to be able to defend who I am as a person over something that happened 3 years ago, because a person who I clearly told I have no interest in continued to bug me for months and months and months. But some people, that can only see their side of the story, I suppose. It's about not doing the highlight reel. And so many of us get stuck on social and digital marketing, trying to do our highlight reel and showing only the very best things that we've done. Or here's my wisdom, here's my strength, here's my achievements, here's the amazing dresses I've worn, or here's the amazing things I've been able to collect along my trail through life. That's for Instagram if you want to become an influencer. I can probably guarantee that almost none of you in the room today or watching this video on YouTube want to be influencers. You're here because you want to try and find a way to be more confident to be who you are on a digital platform. Your authentic self is in itself more interesting than 90% of the rubbish that people are putting on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram these days. I could not be interested in someone flexing their muscles in front of me and showcasing all their hard work. But the minute they tell me that they've come from some background, or they have something they've had to overcome, or they've had something go wrong in their life this week and they really want to talk about, they instantly become far more fascinating. And you know what? I'm more willing to listen to them. I'm far more willing to listen to the guy who said I was 168 kilos and now look at me, I've been to work out. And you know what? It hasn't always been easy. And you know what? I ate half a cheesecake last night. Felt terrible about it. Even myself, I ended up eating half the dessert bar at a buffet on the Gold Coast last night for my parents. My parents have the same birthday, long story, but my father's 80th birthday dinner last night. I'm diabetic. I shouldn't be touching the dessert bar. So I did all the wrong things and then had to sort of make out for it today by ensuring that I'm just eating really clean, really plain food and allowing my blood sugar levels to recover again. I could hide that away and not tell the world that I ate, 4 different pieces of cheesecakes and had 2 lots of ice cream and then had this other chocolate thing. I don't even know what it was, but it was delicious. And I ate 2 servings of duck and 3 servings of roast pork and just completely went overboard. I could just hide all that away. But the authentic person I am has to say that I also have to live out my authentic self as well. At some point, I'll talk about that at some point, you need to give yourself a bit of a break from all this and realize that you can't just be the good person all the time. You actually have to be human at the same time. So the highlight reel is what we get worried about. We need to produce this highlight reel of everything wonderful we are without anyone ever thinking anything bad about us. I can tell you now, no one's thinking about us anyway. So it's just, nobody really cares. At the time they come across your material that you put online, they care for that moment, then they move on. Now, do they care for that moment enough to them to come back and notice you again and interact with you? Or do they just look at it and go, that's so boring. It's just another person flexing, another person saying how wonderful they are, how amazing they are, how great their product is, how great their service is, how much money they made from their network marketing scam this month. All that sort of thing is highlight reel. Authentic self is where you go into a bit more interesting detail about your life. But you got to break that into something which is a benefit to you. So, because you can't just tell bad stories about yourself unless there's some kind of benefit to you. Otherwise, it just sounds like you're trying to get attention. But it's also going to have some sort of maybe benefit to the world as well. So the benefit to you could be in the form of something like discovering your point of difference. So those things about you that you don't necessarily want to talk about, those things about you think are kind of boring and dull that you do every day, but that you think no one would be interested in. Well, those sort of things, they're your point of difference. Those sort of things are a reason for someone to want to engage in conversation or comments or likes or reaching out to your private messages. It's a way to empathize with you. It's really hard to talk to really famous people because they are so separated from us and they make themselves so separated from us to protect themselves that you don't feel like you can approach them. I sometimes get this, like, just because I've got a YouTube channel, and I'll tell you now, it's nothing to write home about. Few hundred subscribers, that's it. I could put my best video on there, and honestly, it'll get about 37 views. Nothing to write home about. But then having someone come to you and say, "Oh, I can't believe how approachable you are for someone who does such good work." And I was like, really? And it's because we quite often approach people that we see doing good things online and we see them as television stars or celebrities or something like that. But the truth is they're just people like the rest of us. You're also more likely to attract contacts as well. So when I say more likely to attract contacts, when you're a little bit more real and a lot more authentic and telling the truth of your story, then you're much more likely to people to want to approach you and will become a contact. Or they'll reach out and make an inquiry, or they'll want to talk to you in a networking function. There's something about authenticity that draws people into you. You can be confident in that because all those things you think you shouldn't be talking about are probably the things you should be talking about. I like to put it this way. I think it was my grandmother, and now my grandmother's been dead for 35 years. So bear with me here, but I'm trying to remember where I got this from. I think it was her. She was saying something like, the problem with lying is that the problem with hiding, the problem with secrets is that if you don't talk about your secrets, someone else will talk about them and they'll no longer be your secret. And I think taking some sort of ownership and control of your own secrets and making them public in your way lets you tell the story in your way, which makes for so much more confidence, because you can then step forward later on and say, I've already talked about this terrible thing and I've moved on. Great, fantastic. The benefits of the world then is that you get to educate others in that area where you operate, in that area of your life where you happen to do things on, or you in that area of life where you may operate that others may not. It might be a disability. It might be a condition. It may be something in your past. It may be something that you're aiming for in the future you think is maybe not the best side of you. But it also it raises awareness of those issues if you're having them or have had them or are working in an area where people don't want to talk about the reality of what you do. It also inspires those who feel similarly to you, who may not be quite at the level of stepping forward that you are, that they were able to go, oh, she did it, then I can. She's talking about her autism. I can talk about mine. He's a public speaker with Tourette's. Maybe I can be a public speaker with Tourette's as well. It emboldens people just like you to participate. So yes, while there's lots of benefit to you, absolutely there is, there's this side effect of also having a benefit to the world in general. That those things that you could step forward with are actually something you can take digitally and online that's really, really powerful and can have some bigger impacts on the world. How I've been doing it is that, well, this guy is an introvert. And I've just been telling you myself throughout this that I'm an introvert. But I'm one of those people, when I step into my work zone, I become more extroverted. I become more expressive. But when I step out of that, I'm very boring. I'm very dull. I prefer to sit down and watch Netflix and go out anywhere. Someone suggested to go to see a movie tonight. I'm like, oh, can't we just watch Netflix, please? I just want to sit on the couch. I just want to cook my own food. I don't want to go to a busy restaurant. But yeah, I constantly battle with things like, wondering what people are thinking about me, imposter syndrome, when I put out a photo of myself and just going, oh my God, it looks so cringe. I feel like an idiot. Or when I make a claim that I know is true and I worked hard to prove because it's the research I've done, and I put it out there and I go, oh, I feel so cringe about this. I feel like I'm just trying to blow my own trumpet. Nothing which is a bad thing, by the way. Blowing your own trumpet is far more preferable than having someone put their dirty lips on their trumpet and play it for you. I would say that I'm not very social. I'd say I don't enjoy noisy places. It seems harsh, but I don't really enjoy meeting new people. I kind of like the people I like, and I don't really need to meet a lot more. I feel like a fraud half the time. I don't like surprises. I don't like to be rushed. So how I've worked with all these, and there might be a 1, 2, 3, or maybe even 6 things in there that resonate with you as well. How I've turned those into advantages for my digital life and for my marketing is that out of that not being very social, I had to learn that going to other people's networking events was a horror for me. I was terrified of it. I didn't want to do it. I felt stupid. So I organized my own. I organized my own networking events to get used to it. Because the funny thing is when you organize your own, you don't have to participate. You're running a thing. So you've got to roll straight away. You don't have to be an attendee trying to justify their presence there. I'm justifying my presence by the fact that I have organized this event. I do a lot more one-to-one consultations because it gets me more practiced at becoming a little bit more socially aware of people. I became a little bit, I worked from home for about 8 years before I started doing this more intense in-person stuff. And that kind of took a lot of my social skills that I had. I was a very outgoing youngster, but I became very introverted and very much a hermit. So I decided that to do that, I need to do more one-to-one consultations with people on Zoom, in person, hosting more webinars, hosting more in-person workshops. And by doing this, it gave me a lot more confidence to be able to go to other people's events and network more effectively. Again, we're not going spontaneously and throwing ourselves in the deep end here. We're using all these things strategically as a plan. I planned to organize my own networking events before I started doing it. It took me a year before I did it. I planned to do more one-on-one consultations, but it took me 6 months to get myself in the position where I could do it. And then hosting more webinars and workshops, I had to plan them out. I had to write down a total of 50 different topics for workshops and the outlines of those workshops first before I commit to actually doing the workshops. I had to know that I had all the things, all the ducks in a row before I do it. Again, this is not making us into sudden extroverts. It's not making us into suddenly spontaneous people. It's taking what we're very good at, which is planning and arranging things and lining things up, and turning that into something which makes us more sociable. My second problem being that I don't like noisy places. So I work from home when I need to. If I feel like I really cannot do a loud environment, I've got the flexibility, and I've made this in my career, something I've worked at, that if I need to, I can work from home. If I need to, I can get into a quiet place. In events that I'm running, I like to have a quiet breakout area, because even if I'm running the event, I sometimes need a few minutes just to sort of recharge my batteries, take a breath, step outside where it's a bit quieter, go into the back garage, go into the quiet meeting room, go somewhere. For some people, it's as simple as going to the toilet. They'll go to the toilet just to take a couple of minutes to just recharge their batteries before they walk back out into that event. All these things are really valid ways of being able to deal with things you're not comfortable with, things that you need to become more confident at. Again, it's not magically making you confident. What it does, it uses the things you're very good at, which is getting into a quiet place, removing yourself from areas where you think are toxic, and allowing yourself to build up that little bit of momentum to be able to get back out there and do it again. And I like to also, if I've gone to a crazy, busy, adrenaline rushy, loud, chatty event, the last thing I want to do is just talk to more people afterwards at coffee and hear more noise. No, what I want to do is take some time out after the event. Now, if they've got an after drinks at that, and it's quite if they do want to go to conferences, what I do is say, hey, I'll be a little bit later. Just give me half an hour. Go back to my hotel room, or go back to my home, or go back to somewhere where I can get a bit of space to myself and decompress. Just sort of, just breathe in and out a little bit, just to go, okay, that was a lot. Allow myself to charge my batteries up a little bit again, and take a little bit of time out before I then re-engage with the world again in a noisy environment. It's just taking, again, what we're good at doing, which is removing ourselves from environments that make us feel a little bit sick and tired, and gives us a little bit of room to go and then be confident again. It's not we're not confident. We are confident when it's on our terms and it's our time. So we like to be able to take that time and gain a little bit of control back so we can feel better about it. I didn't enjoy meeting new people. So what I'd done online is started to meet people online. Now, I'm someone who was very early on the internet. 1995, 96, I was chatting in chat rooms when they first came about, through bulletin board systems as well. And that was basically doing that by going in and chatting to people with kind of like walkie-talkie fashion. I say something, you say something back. You might not get it for 24 hours, we get it back eventually. And then what I do is meet people through online calls. And you do this now where you go, okay, rather than making a disembodied phone call, I'm far better when it's a video call where I can see someone in person, empathize with them. They can see me agreeing with them, active listening. And it works so much better. But another tool I've used has been going into a very unfamiliar environment, particularly in conferences, is I look for my wing person. You know, think of Tom Cruise and having his wingman in Top Gun. I have my wing person, someone who I know who I can be a touch point with. So when I need to recharge my batteries from meeting all these new people, I go and see someone who I know. I can have a touch point with them, spend 5 minutes saying, okay, thank you so much, and then get back to the networking and doing all the things I'm meant to be there for. All of these things make you better and more confident in the run when you're trying to do it. Feeling like a fraud, that's a whole thing to do with imposter syndrome. There could be a whole webinar just about that. And I've done many of them before. What I do to remind myself that I'm better than I think I am is that I review my insights on LinkedIn, Facebook, and look at my analytics on Google, all those things that tell me straight in black and white numbers how good I am or how bad I am. And I look at that and go, yeah, you're not a fraud. You're doing pretty well this week. You had 14,000 views on your profile, on your 14,000 views on your on your LinkedIn post this week and it's the first week of the year, that's a pretty good start to the week. So yeah, you're not a fraud. You're doing fine. Doing regular courses. So I keep learning things. My imposter syndrome plays out in overlearning and overachieving. So for me, that's not a bad thing. It's not a pathological behavior. It's got a very positive outcome to it. And listening to a lot of podcasts, making sure I know everything I possibly can that's new, that's got ideas and opinions and people who have used things I haven't, so I don't have to feel like a fraud. Because the minute I start to feel like a fraud, I got to remind myself, you listen to 27 podcasts this week, so you have all the most late and great information. You're not a fraud. You've got good information. You know what you're doing. The other one is not liking surprises. So I set myself only 2 to 3 topics I ever talk about online. What I used to do was I used to speak a lot about a lot of other areas that I do a little bit of, but not a lot of, and I'm not an expert in those areas. And what I would do is get called out in those things. I'd get surprised by some new piece of information that I didn't know about that made me look like a fool online. So what I've done is stop talking about those topics. I picked out 3 topics that I talk about, things that I do all the time. One thing is social media. Second thing is personal branding. The third thing is podcasting. 3 things that I have extensive experience and extensively do throughout my week. So by doing that, then I don't get those surprises. I don't get people one-upping me with the latest information because I've got the latest information, just told you about it. So there's no one going to have even more later information than that. So no surprises. I like to pre-arrange everything I posted out for the year. I was telling you just earlier, I've got a spreadsheet now, which has every single post for the rest of the year, what I'm writing and what it's about. The only thing I have to do for the rest of the year is produce the graphics for that social media post. It's fantastic. There's no surprises there. Write everything for the week at least a month in advance. So make sure if there's anything new that's coming up, no surprises. It's going to come up. Now, sometimes there will be things you need to post, and that's fine. They come up in your life. Do those as well. They're not surprises. I call them little gifts that you put in through the week. They're things you didn't expect to post, which you then go and post. I also don't like to be rushed. Anyone else who feels they relate very, very strongly to this, I certainly do. Sunday night, I use to clear out my emails. There's a lot of junk that appears in my mailbox over the weekend. So Sunday night, what I'll often do, if it's not Sunday night, I'll often wake up for the sunrise on Monday morning first and go and look at the sunrise and go, yeah, it's beautiful. Come back, clear out my mailbox, clear out all the junk, clear out all the things I don't need to look at, triage my email so that when I start work at 8 o'clock, I don't have any of that on my mind because I've already dealt with it. It's gone. It's out of the way and I can get on with my day. I tend to time block my day and my tasks. So I get booked out for certain sessions of the day. And I block out my lunch. I block out things like when I'm trying to get particular project work done, like getting my monthly report for December done today. I had to do that for a business station. So I blocked out time to do that and it got done. I also try to work to what's called the Pomodoro method. And the Pomodoro method in its most raw form is you basically schedule in your distractions. So I'm someone who is easily distracted by things online. I'm housing mining dogs at the moment. The dogs constantly are taking away my attention from what I'm doing. So what I do with the Pomodoro method is you work for 25 minutes straight without distractions. And then you, for 5 minutes, allow yourself to go sick with distractions. Get up, go for a walk, go pat the dogs, go throw the ball for them, dip my foot in the pool, get out another fresh Pepsi Max in the fridge and have a drink. All those things that I keep having coming up on my mind. It's like, oh no, I can do that in 10 minutes. I can do that in 5 minutes. And then my Pomodoro time comes up, which is at 25 minutes. For 5 minutes, I'm allowed to go sick. Now, does that break the concentration I'm working on? Yeah, if you're working on very long projects that require lots and lots of focus at one time, this may not be suitable for you. It's just something which I found very suitable to me. So to sum it all up, much of the stress of being introverted and needing to be more confident online can be planned around. Your differences you might see as something which are liabilities are actually assets. They actually are your points of difference that help you to stand out. And standing out is a good thing because it allows you to be read when other things from other people who do what you do may not be because they're too generic. Authentic content makes you interesting. Telling your truth, telling your story. If it's in there to tell some sort of lesson of how you did something to overcome, it's an interesting story. And make yourself a few allowances. Like for me, making sure I can get away after a conference or after a networking session before I start talking to more people, take 5 minutes out in a quiet place. I just allow myself to recharge the batteries enough to step back out with a smiling face and be charismatic as I want to. Make some allowances and understand that you don't have to be an extrovert. You don't have to be faking your confidence. What you do is work with the tools as an introvert that you've got to make all that difference.